Today, I'm going to show you how to stitch up the Ilford jacket. Hello, I'm Katherine Harris from Minerva, and today I'm going to show you how to stitch up the Ilford jacket from Friday Pattern Company. Now, we have a kit that goes along with this pattern, and I will link everything down below to my specific kit, but there's also a number of different fabric options to choose from for each one of the kits, so do be sure to check them all out. Now, this jacket is a unisex jacket, and it does come with two variations. Now, the first variation is a shorter style jacket that has a placketed cuff that comes on, so it kind of tightens up along the wrist a little bit more. It's a bit more cropped as well. And then there is the longer version that has the wider sleeves. Now that's the version that I decided to make, and we'll show you how to stitch up. That being said, if you have any questions at all for the other views, do let us know in the comments down below, and we'll be sure to get back to you very soon. So without further ado, let's dive into what you're gonna need to stitch this up.
Okay, so first we have this lovely corduroy fabric, and then of course you're going to get the paper pattern of the Ilford jacket right here. And then we have some fusible interfacing, needles, as well as matching thread. And of course our jacket would not be complete without a set of buttons that coordinate with your fabric.
Now that you have all of your materials all ready, you can take a look at some of the options that they have with pockets. There are a ton of different pockets that you can add on. You've got two different variations of upper pockets that also include optional flaps with buttons, as well as two different variations of lower pockets to use, a large lower as well as one with a hand warmer. So I decided to opt for the large lower pockets with nothing on top, but it is pretty straightforward in how to construct the rest of those pockets. So let's dive into actually stitching this up.
Okay, so we're going to start by preparing the pattern pieces. So I am just grabbing the collar pieces, and we are going to interface just one of those collar pieces. So press it to make sure you get rid of any wrinkles. This is fusible interfacing, so the one with the little dots has the glue on it, and we are going to press this. Now, I would suggest using a pressing cloth and not to drag it over like I just did. It'll bunch up on you like that. That being said, I wanted to make sure you could see this a bit better, so I am not using a pressing cloth. And then we are going to press the collar pieces here on the placket, and we are going to cut those strips just according to the pattern and interface those pieces as well, just to stabilize that button area. Now this isn't in the pattern, but at the top of the pocket, to prevent any gaping, I always like to interface the seam allowance here. This is going to be a double fold hem. If you're using thicker fabric, you don't need to do this, but if it's a thinner fabric, I would suggest doing that as well. Now for the collar. So on the collar piece here, on the piece that is interfaced, go ahead and draw the seam allowance. And in this, it is 5/8 of an inch. So I've just drawn that on just to make it a little bit easier when we press it, because we want to press up that 5/8 of an inch. And when it's on a curve, it can be a little tricky. So I am just going in here, and then with right sides together, take both of your collar pieces and go ahead and pin them together. Now you want to make sure that that folded edge that we just pressed is remaining folded. We want that to be a memory hem as we're stitching this in place. So I'm just dividing those pins up, and then we're going to stitch all the way around the collar piece. So starting at that folded edge, don't forget to backstitch, and then using your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, go ahead and stitch that. So I have this handy piece of washi tape on the side of my sewing machine that is perfect for doing those 5/8 of an inch seam allowances and making sure that everything lines up all the time, especially when we are turning that fabric on the corner, which is where you can sometimes mix up on those larger seam allowances. So next we need to reduce that bulk along the corners here. So I'm just trimming off those corners. And then we are going to go ahead and grade the seam allowances. You could use regular scissors, but I like to use these duck-billed scissors. It just makes it a little bit easier, and it also is a really good safeguard to not cut any of the fabric underneath. So trim the one that is interfaced about in half to grade that seam allowance. Then we can flip this right side out, just like so, and grab your point turner and use the pointed end to really get those nice crisp corners right along the inside here. And so once we have that turned out, head on over to your pressing board. We want to get this pressed. Now for the shoulder seams. So with the shoulder seams here, and apologies, it's slightly off camera here, we are going to place right sides together with the front and the back. And we're just going to pin along the entire top of that shoulder seam along both sides. So I've got the one front, and now we're going to get the other front pinned in here. And once we have that all pinned nicely, let's head on over to our sewing machine and let's stitch along here. So once again, we're using that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the start and the end, and stitch both of those shoulder seams. And I am just using a regular stitch length and a regular needle like what came in the kit here. And then you don't have to do it, but I like to finish my edges with an overlocker or a serger just for a little extra stability. You could also use a zigzag stitch if you only have a domestic machine. Now over at the pressing table, go ahead and press those seams towards the back of your Ilford jacket. So I'm just using a bit of steam to get this pressed in place, just like so. And now that that is all pressed, then we can work on the side seams and the sleeves. So with this, go ahead and along the entire length of that side seam, there's the shoulder seam right there, go ahead and overlock those edges. So we're going to overlock the entire edge of that. So you can see it kind of goes all the way around on both side seams. And then on the sleeves, you're going to overlock all of the edges except where the cuff is. So you can see we've got the two long edges of the sleeve and then the pointed area that will form the sleeve cap. So you'll notice there are two notches on one side. That denotes the back with the two notches, and a single notch for the front end, because the sleeves do have a front and a back. Place them right sides together, match up the shoulder seam with the point on the sleeve, and then go ahead and match those double notches and single notches just going down that side seam here. Now this is a little bit of a different sleeve. We have two little dots on either end. We are actually going to start at one dot right here and put your needle in. So you'll notice that it is 5/8 of an inch away from the edge. That's important because that is our seam allowance. Do not start at the very tip or you will have difficulties doing the rest of the sleeve. Now when you get to this seam right here, we are going to backstitch and stop. Right here, that's right. And then we're going to flip that seam right over. And so you can see that we've done that, and then just continue on the other side. So as we have done that, so I have done the one side here, and then we are going to place this together. So you can see how I'm doing this on the other side. That way you can see it twice because it is a little bit tricky. So I'm just matching that up. So you can see it's matched up right here. And then I am going to place my pins in here. And now on this end, when we do on the one side, we are going to go from the very bottom of our Ilford jacket up to that underarm seam. And then we are going to flip to the other side. So we're going to go up on one side, stop, and then go to the other side, and then continue on the sleeve. So let me just show you this. So I have come up to that underarm seam right here coming from the bottom. I have back stitched. And then I'm lifting my presser foot, cutting my threads, removing that pin and flipping that seam. So that's that underarm seam right there. And then as close as I can get to that underarm seam, I'm putting my needle down, back stitching, and then continuing down the rest of the sleeve. Now this helps for the movement within the jacket. So you can see that I have it just like so. And I decided to press the seams open. So I did give a little snip in between there. And now for the placket and the hem of the jacket. So on this, we want to fold under a portion of the hem and the bottom of the jacket. So right here, I've got a 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to do that all along the placket. So this is going to create the finished edge on the inside of the placket when we press it over. So we're going to do that on both sides, just like so. And then we are going to do the bottom hem. So the bottom hem is actually 1 inch. That comes up. So just go ahead and measure that 1 inch. Because this is a larger hem, I do like to use my gauge going along the edges just to make sure that I've got it nice and even as you go along. And it's really important to make sure that that hem is even, especially in the center front where it is going to button up. Next, on the placket, you'll notice we've got 2 snips on the top here. We're going to place this right sides together, matching up those 2 notches. This is going to form the top of our placket. And I'm just placing a couple of pins in here. You'll notice the one side is over, and then we're just going to stitch only to that notch. So don't stitch all the way across. So you can see it's just like so. We've got a little edge that is open. And then on the other end, you can see we can flip this to the right side, and let's flip the bottom so that it's right sides together. And we're just going to match that end up along the placket. And that 1 inch stitching or fold line provides the perfect stitching line. So stitch all the way across there along both sides. Now on the top of that placket, you're going to make a snip going right down to that stitching before you turn it right side out. So when you're turning it right side out, the placket will actually fold towards the wrong side of the jacket. I'm just using my point turner to get a nice crisp point on each of the placket ends. So just use your point turner and then go ahead with your iron and press that nice and flat. So you can see that that 1/4 of an inch that we folded along the edge of the placket forms that finishing edge, and this is the inside of our Ilford jacket. So get it nice and pressed, because our next step here is going to be to top stitch this in place. And so I'm just adding a couple of pins just to make sure everything is looking nicely in here. And then along that bottom hem, you're going to flip it under a 1/4 of an inch along that. And so your hem will actually be 3/4 of an inch around where that stitching line is, because you folded under a 1/4 of an inch on that. So coming down the placket, I'm starting at the top, going all the way to the bottom, and go all the way to the bottom, and do be sure to backstitch. When that is done, that's when you can go ahead and stitch the hem. Do both of the plackets first and then stitch the hem, just going along that nice fold line there. And then you can see that the placket is finished, as well as the nice bottom hem with a really nice finish along the edge. Now for the collar. Now with the collar piece here, we have it all pressed from the step before, and then you can see these 2 little notches. Remember that we had cut out when we had done our stitching there. That will fit perfectly for the collar so that everything matches up perfectly. So we're going to match up those ends as well as the centers first, and then just distribute those pins in between, just going nicely around the curve. You shouldn't have to make any clips to make it fit, because it's a nice gentle curve. Now stitch at your seam allowance length, and then we are going to go in here and we are going to grade that seam allowance. So we are just grading that top portion right here and just cutting it in half, just to reduce some of that bulk within the seams. And then, because it is a curve, we are going to create a few snips in here just to allow it to sit a little nicer. Now we're going to press the seams up towards the collar portion. So I like to use my pressing hand because it is curved, and it really helps on that collar to get a nice curved seam. So you can see I am pressing it in here, and then I am going to go over and press down the collar over top. So next I'm working from the right side, and I can feel from the right side the underside of that collar. We want with our pins to catch the underside of that collar, because when we stitch in the ditch on the right outside of the collar, we want to catch that collar piece that is open. So we're going to stitch that in place. So you can see I'm stitching in the ditch. Do be sure to backstitch so that you can secure those stitches. And when it is done, it should look a little something like this. Our collar and placket are all all complete now. We just have a few finishing touches to do. So now for the sleeve hem. So with the sleeve hem, we are just going to fold it in a double fold and then just top stitch all the way around. And it should look a little something like this once it is all stitched in place. Nice and simple. Now for the optional patch pockets. Now with the patch pockets, go ahead and I like to serge or zigzag the exterior edges just to make sure that we've got everything all nice. Plus it gives a really nice fold line for us to use as a guide. Then, according to the pattern, fold down the top portion and then fold it once more to create a double fold hem at the top. Now, this is what we are going to top stitch along the top, just like so. So it should look like this. Next, I like to use my quilting rulers to really line up my pocket pieces so that they are the exact same on both the front and the back. You can use your regular tape measure if you want. I just find this really helpful with a square because you're actually squaring off that pocket along the edges. And so it's just my little tip in terms of putting on pockets to make sure that they are perfectly straight. And then go ahead and top stitch along the edge, and if you want, you can add a little triangle on either side just to add a little extra security. And then the finishing touches on the placket is, of course, putting in the buttons and the buttonholes. So the pattern has a buttonhole guide. I just traced my guide onto some thicker paper than the tissue that it came with, just so that I could reuse it and cut some holes in it. And then we are going to stitch those buttonholes on. I like to use a buttonhole chisel rather than using a seam ripper because I have destroyed many a garment using my seam ripper, even when I put a pin across the end, especially if you're working with thicker fabric. This one isn't terribly thick, so I don't think there would be much of an issue, but just in case, that chisel is nice and precise. And then just attach those buttons and your Ilford jacket is complete and ready to wear to your next function. How did it go?
Let it go, what's the use in holding on? Can we find a way where we could spend some time alone? You know where to find me, you know which way to go. As long as you love me, we'll be singing all night long. So take a minute to hold me. I want nothing more than your arms and to be your baby tonight.
And there you have it. Your Ilford jacket is all complete. Now, everything that I used will be linked down below for you, including the kit. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Now, if you are not already a member here on Minerva, do be sure to create an account. It is completely free and it is a great space to share all of your creative and sewing makes. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about myself, I am at Sheer Stitchery here on Minerva, and I'll link my profile down below. Until next time, makers.